David, please.
Thank you, ma'am. And thank you for the invitation to attend this conference. It's been really a pleasure to learn more about the South African context and the African context. It's very interesting because coming here you realize that even though we're in completely different parts of the world, there are a lot of similarities, many themes. So what I wanted to do today was to provide a little bit of context on coca. It's not an issue that is discussed very much internationally, as coca leaf is really only grown in 3 countries in the world, in Colombia, Peru, and Bolivia. And so in order for us to be able to provide a little bit of perspective and lessons that might be applicable to South Africa and other contexts, we wanted to give a little bit of a history of the challenges that we're facing and the reform opportunities ahead. So I come from the western part of Colombia, from the 3rd largest city called Cali. And Colombia, thought it might make sense for me to just give a really quick overview. We're actually very similar to South Africa, similar in size, similar in population, and facing very similar issues in terms of income inequality and land inequality. I've come into the drug policy reform world from having spent over a decade working in the corporate world in product innovation and strategy. And my feeling from being in that world was that, and looking at Colombia from London and the US, is that all this drug policy reform seemed very interesting, but also had really big risks underneath it. And in Colombia, we're seeing those risks play out, particularly with cannabis. Colombia has legalized cannabis, but the model of industrial development that is taking place there is not a model that has taken into consideration producer needs or even consumer needs, but to a very large extent is recreating a corporate model that I believe is not what is needed for drug policy reform. So what I thought was, how could we think about the coca leaf in a different way? And coca leaf, in many ways, is years behind cannabis in terms of research into the different product applications that cannabis has, and it's many years behind in terms of creating a very large legal market. So I felt we were in the at the right time to set a precedent for how we create this industrial model for coca leaf that avoids some of the mistakes of cannabis. So I wanted to achieve 3 things today, and it was to give you this context of coca and cocaine policy, and talk to you about why coca leaf reform matters, and then about the importance of driving reform from the bottom up. Doing reform in closed rooms and just through an elite discussion between politicians and advocacy is a sure way of avoiding the benefits from reform to really filter through to producers and to consumers. So let's take a step back and talk a little bit about coca leaf. And I think what coca leaf is very poorly understood. So I wanted to go straight to the misconceptions. So coca leaf is not cocoa or cacao, like some presidents around the world think it is. Coca leaf is not Coca-Cola, although Coca-Cola does contain decocainized flavoring of coca leaf, and it does so to the present day. It used to have whole leaf up until the early 20th century, but it has coca leaf flavorings even now. They don't like to talk about it very much, but as soon as you start doing any little bit of journalistic work, you'll find that there's evidence of it all over the place. And coca leaf is not cocaine hydrochloride. Often the word coca in Spanish is used interchangeably with cocaine, but it's a very different thing. A friend of mine from Bolivia used to say, you cannot compare alcohol to grapes, and you cannot compare, you won't find in grapes alcohol. With coca, it's a little bit different because coca does contain some of the alkaloid, the alkaloid that eventually becomes a cocaine hydrochloride, but it is in a very small amount within the coca leaf. So you need 100 to 300 kilograms of coca leaf to produce 1 kilogram of cocaine. And you have to add gasoline, sulfuric acid, and ammonia to then turn it into coca paste. Then you have to go through a number of different processes in which you add a number of toxic substances to actually get to cocaine hydrochloride or to crack cocaine. So there is a huge difference between coca leaves and cocaine hydrochloride or crack cocaine. And you can't really compare the two very much. The pharmacokinetic profile, the way that the alkaloids in coca leaf affect how your body works, is very, very different from the way that cocaine or crack work. So you cannot really compare the two. So cocaine is a very recent arrival in the scene, and the history of coca is very, very long. I mean, the archaeological record of coca goes back 4,000 to 8,000 years ago. It's sometimes hard to figure out if the coca that has been identified in some archaeological findings is wild or if it's domesticated, but the range is very, very long. We're talking about coca as being one of the first crops to have been domesticated in the world. And for millennia, it was central to very many indigenous cultures in Central and South America. During the colonial period, coca was used, but then the Spaniards really disliked coca because it challenged their spiritual hegemony. The church did not like coca because it was linked to shamanic healing and to the spirituality of indigenous people. But it turned out that without coca, the mining and plantation economy that the colonizers were trying to impose wouldn't work. Coca leaf was so fundamental to people being able to do work in difficult environments that the Spaniards decided to tolerate it. And so for the 300 years of the colonial period, coca was present throughout the Andean region. And it was very much linked to indigenous people. So, white people, or people who wanted to seem white, did not want to associate with coca leaf. It was seen as the indigenous and the underlings' habit. Then something strange happened in the middle of the 19th century, and it was that certain Europeans started finding interest in coca, and the first legal boom around coca started happening, and there was this very popular product called Vin Mariani. It was a wine mixed with coca leaf. And cocaine was eventually isolated by some German labs in the mid-19th century. And so there was a huge enthusiasm around these products, and they were widely consumed in North America and in Europe. And what's interesting about this first period was that, the way that coca was industrialized resembles a little bit the way that cannabis is being industrialized today. It was an elite type of industrialization where you had plantation economy, and you had control of the intellectual property around this crop. And then, of course, there was the cocaine scares and the stigmatization of coca and cocaine, which led to a very gradual the decline of the legal market. And interestingly, it was after coca was completely prohibited in the early 1960s that you see the new boom, which is the period in which we are today, where cocaine spread through the illicit market, but gradually and underneath this current, coca has starting to rehabilitate itself. So a little bit of the context of the cocaine market today. Cocaine is the largest illicit economy in the world, and it's a huge fuel to the violent conflict in Latin America and around the world. And it's a bigger illicit economy than the heroin market. The illicit cocaine market is an example of colonial dynamics and unfair trade. Over 90% of the value of cocaine is created in shipping and in selling to consumer countries. So you can see at the bottom of the chart the price of a kilogram of cocaine and how it increases as it goes up towards consumer markets. So less than 10% of the value of that supply chain is created in the Andean region. And coca farmers actually take less than 1% of that final value. Over 200,000 families in Colombia, some of the poorest people in the country, make less than $170 a month, and that's just gross income from growing coca leaves. And if you look at the landscape of coca farmers, 60% are just growing coca. Some of them are also transforming coca into coca paste or basic cocaine, but this is still not a very profitable product. And less than 1% of the people who own coca fields go all the way to cocaine hydrochloride. Just a quick point here. Colombia, unlike Peru and Bolivia, has no legal coca market whatsoever. And the result of that is that the coca farmers have very limited negotiating power, and their prices are therefore significantly lower than they are in the Peruvian and Bolivian markets. So even though the farmers are the weakest link in the whole supply chain, they have been the focus of drug policy, and Colombia has consistently been attacking these people for the past 30 years. So you've heard, this is the same phenomenon you see here in South Africa. We're just talking about hundreds of thousands of hectares being sprayed with glyphosate through airplanes. A practice that stopped for just 4 years, but which is about to start again as a new right-wing president is pushing for this policy to be re-implemented. And nothing really happened overall to coca production. It just moved around the Andean region and the levels stayed the same. And nothing happened to cocaine demand trends. The level of cocaine demand is still also the same. So I started off with coca as what it wasn't. So what is coca? Coca is a natural plant. This actually is growing right next to my house. It's a picture of it's an ornamental plant that people used to have all over the place and still do to some extent. It's consumed by approximately 6 to 7 million people in South America. And it is, in its traditional conception, it is central to spirituality, to nutrition, and as a work aid. And I think that original meaning of coca is something that we need to really focus on. And the knowledge that has been built around traditional coca cultivation and consumption is, I think, the key towards reform into the future. So this is just quickly some use methods with whole leaves and pulverized leaves. You are interested, you can ask me afterwards. But I wanted to stop here briefly because the cultural meaning of coca, I think, holds the key for really moving forward with coca reform. You know, coca is meant to be a powerful and gentle feminine force that nourishes the individual and the community. It's meant to connect the human world to the natural and transcendental worlds, and keeping those two in balance. It is intended to promote thoughtful and compassionate communication, and it's meant to bring communities together to resolve conflict. The idea of coca is to energize the individual and the community to work in the service of a greater good. So to me, coca stands for the opposite of impulsive and throwaway consumer culture. And so if we want to reform the coca world, we need to really think about those principles as guides for moving forward. So here's just a very quick chart on the composition of coca leaf and the different types of applications that could emerge from it. And here I just want to stop to give you a comparative perspective of Bolivia, Peru, and Colombia. All right. So I think the main lesson that I can draw from this chart is that the policy formulation approach chosen has a lot to do with the outcomes that you get from policy. Bolivia, although it has varied, has had the most bottom-up approach towards building its drug policy framework for coca, and the results have been better prices for farmers, stable coca hectarage, low cocaine use prevalence, and low violence in coca growing areas. Colombia, that has the most top-down approach and has listened to the most to the US and how it's formulated its policy, has the opposite, the worst outcomes for farmers and the highest levels of violence. So if we, I think I'm going to jump to the next slide because I'm being pressured a little bit to finish up here. But I think if we want to move forward with coca, we need to find ways of conducting more research, of strengthening dialogue between traditional medicine and clinical researchers, and driving technology and policy innovation through producers and consumers. What I'm very interested in as well is the community and social entrepreneurship models, because it is these kinds of models that are likely to bring benefits to communities in a better way than the current state monopolies that exist in Peru and Bolivia, and the standard corporation model that is emerging in cannabis. So, thank you.